Hi folks, welcome back. I'm Janae Cherie, and today I'll be answering the question of why I didn't report my abuse. Trigger warning, we will be talking about child sexual abuse as well as psychological, emotional, and physical abuse. So a lot of abuse. I do have an entire separate section on my cancer treatments. This is my section on the abuse I grew up with and how I got through that. Completely understand if you are not here for both. So thank you for joining and let's get into it. So why didn't I report my child abuse? So let's talk really quick, high level. How did my abuse come to light? So I was abused from the ages of 8 to 18 and moved out at 18. And when I was 22, by an extremely bizarre sequence of events, which I should do a whole separate video on, it's fascinating, I was contacted by law enforcement and they said, I want to talk to you about your dad. And that conversation, as 4 years later, at least, after multiple trials and everything else, lots of drama, he was convicted of child abuse. And he was put into jail and sentenced to 14 years. But back to the question is, why didn't I report it? I never reported it. I 100% cooperated when I was contacted, but I genuinely never thought to report it because I didn't think it would be taken seriously, honestly. So let's talk about why. So like I said, I was abused from the ages of 8 to 18, so starting very, very young. And couple significant things happened during that time. At the age of 13, my father confessed to my mom and his therapist, and I was there when he confessed to my mother for touching me inappropriately. And because he told my mother what happened and my mother didn't do anything about it, I was under the impression that my mother knew, my family knew. I thought everyone in my family knew because of some other things that my father said to imply that, as well as some things my family said that made me think that. And I thought that everyone knew and nobody cared. My mother supposedly tried to take me to therapy when I was 13, and I remember very little about going to therapy except that we never really talked about it. That was it. It was swept under the rug. My mother never brought it up again. The therapist that my father reported it to actually contacted CPS. And so CPS and law enforcement supposedly investigated. But CPS never talked to me. They never asked me what happened. They never talked to me about the situation. And so what ended up happening, that I learned during the trial much, much later, is that my father gave CPS a dramatically minimized series of stories about one incident that he said happened, extraordinarily minor, and it was dismissed as an accident, an accidental touch, and they moved on. And I completely understand CPS is overburdened, and we're not here to talk about that. The CPS investigator was very transparent that he did not follow protocol by not talking to me when he testified years later. But what that did is that at 13 years old, it gave my father this foundation to say CPS investigated, the police investigated. They found that I'm not a threat anymore. And so for years and years until I moved out at 18, I had been told that voice in my ear saying, I'm not a threat. The police don't care about you, Janae. CPS doesn't care. Police doesn't care. They looked into it. I told them everything, and they don't care. And of course, how am I to know that he lied about what happened? He minimized the severity of everything, pretended it was an accident. He never told them it was an ongoing thing. I didn't know because nobody ever asked me. So in terms of that significant incident, that was really important. The other thing that you have to understand is about our upbringing in general. My father was the head of the household. We grew up in a very fundamentalist, strict Christian group that basically said the man was the head of the household. What he said went. Nobody else had any say. My mother had no say in anything. My mother had no autonomy. We had no autonomy. It was just when he says jump, we say how high. Yes, Father, whatever you say. And that affected a lot of the way you handled things as a young child and then, of course, growing up. And he ruled with excessive punishment, fear, intimidation. He had things like a spanking stick that he would use on us, which was a plastic and metal stick that he would beat us with. Basically, he primarily beat my brother, but we all got to see that. He was extraordinarily violent with my brother. He would pick fights with him and then get him committed on 5150s. And so you just knew that if you did anything against him, you had a lot to lose physically and everything else. It was just really bad. And what my father would do is he also had some very manipulative tactics, like apologies. Sounds simple, but he would do these dramatic apologies. And these happened many times as I was growing up. And he would apologize for molesting me and for hurting me and da-da-da-da. And it was this big thing, and he would sob and cry, and he'd turn on the waterworks. He's a fantastic actor, and he would just put on the waterworks and tell you he wanted to confess his sins, and he was so sorry, and he'd beg your forgiveness. And then the idea was that you would forgive him because he was your dad and he wanted you to forgive him. So of course you would do that. And then you were never allowed to bring it up again. His slate was wiped clean. And this was a recurring theme where from the religious side is like, well, you confess your sin and then it's a clean slate. But he missed that whole element in the Bible where they talk about actually not doing the same crime or sin again. And he would just do it again because it didn't matter. And of course, he was the head of the household. He owned us, basically, so he could do whatever the hell he wanted with us. And so that was very much a recurring theme in our childhood. The other thing that was a really big theme growing up was protecting the family. So we were not allowed to talk about things that happened in the family to anyone outside the family. My mother used to get yelled at if she would talk about family issues with her sister or her mom. And we all saw that, and we knew we were not allowed to talk about family issues with people outside the family. And my mother was really bad at that too, is she always wanted it to look like we had the perfect white picket fence family. And so we didn't talk about the bad things. It was very much a secret. It was always a secret because we had to protect the family image and what we looked like. We just didn't talk about these things. And keep in mind, I thought my mother didn't care about any of this. And to this day, I don't think she does, because she stood by him regardless of everything, is, just didn't care. And my mother was not a very caring mother anyway. So it's not like you could go to her and say, let's talk about this. She didn't care. And again, what daddy said went. So even if I had said something against him, it wouldn't have mattered. She didn't care. He was who she was devoted to. I've always said if one of her kids was drowning and her husband was drowning, she would rescue her husband first, because it was always obvious from the moment we were children that she cared about him more than she cared about us. So who are you going to tell? Who are you going to tell? You're a kid who's being abused and your mom doesn't care, the police don't care, CPS doesn't care, the whole family doesn't care. Now, he did mislead me to believe that the whole family knew about the abuse. That was not true, and I do wish that I had told them. But again, a kid. You can't blame a kid. Another significant thing that happened is that at around 16, I started finding my voice. And one of the ways I started finding my own voice is rebelling a little bit. And so I found a secret boyfriend, and I smoked weed a couple times, and I tried alcohol a couple times. It's nothing crazy. I was very tame in terms of teenage rebellion, but I was caught, and my father was pissed, and he responded to that whole situation in just an extraordinarily punitive way. Like I said earlier, he ruled by fear, intimidation, and excessive punishment. And at 16, it wasn't just the spanking stick anymore. It started emerging into things like humiliating strip searches, excessive physical labor, sleep deprivation. He would keep me up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning quizzing me about my sexploits with my boyfriend at 16. He took away all privacy. I had no door. He emptied my bank account. So I had been trying to get emancipated, and he figured out that I was trying to run away, get emancipated and all that. And so he emptied my bank account, took away the keys to my car. And the fact that he let me have a car in the first place is shocking, but I think the only reason he did is because I bought it myself. But he locked it down. The moment he saw that I was starting to think for myself and do things for me, which I had never done before, he hit me hard. He started really hitting on the threats. He started saying things along the lines of, if you do anything to hurt me, if you do anything to get out of line, I'll have you committed. He said he was going to have me picked up on a 5150. And he would, at the time, I had a passion and really wanted to go into law enforcement to help people. Ironically, I wanted to be in law enforcement so that I could actually protect people in the same situation as I was and help people out of these bad situations. But if I got picked up on a 5150, I would lose my career in law enforcement, and my father knew it. And he made it very clear that he would get me committed for being out of line. I was volatile, and he used these very dramatized words to explain what is really standard teenage rebellion, to say he was going to get me picked up on a 5150. And I believed it. I fully believed it. Why did I believe it? Because he did it to my brother. My brother, he would get into big fights with my brother. He would instigate physical violence with my brother. And then who would go to jail? My brother, because he would tell them that it was my brother's fault. And so I had full belief that if I stepped a toe out of line, that he would have me committed. It would ruin my life. My career choices, my ambitions would be gone. So I just knew he could hurt me in many, many ways. By the time my brother was 14, 15, he was in juvenile hall permanently, and he never came home again. And he is now unfortunately deceased. But, my father destroyed his life, and he never supported his recovery, and is a huge reason that I believe that my brother is dead. There's a lot of reasons. And then let's fast forward to 18. So I moved out at 18, and I was on my own. Well, now what? Now I am an adult, and he can't hold things over my head anymore. Oh, wait, I'm wrong. He can. Because he would tell me things like, if you do X, I'll never let you see your siblings again. If you do Y, I'll never let you see the family again. Well, my sisters and my brothers were so important to me. And I had such a hard time moving out at 18 because I couldn't be there to protect them anymore. I couldn't be cut off from them. So even then I felt like I still have to kind of stay in line. And then on top of that, what evidence did I have? I didn't feel like I had any evidence. I had a couple emails that my father had sent alluding to taking away my purity, and I had a couple other little things that I could use as evidence. But while I generally believe that the court system does the best I can, and that and I'm very happy many people get justice, I also know that many people don't get justice, because a lot of, especially in child abuse and sexual abuse and domestic violence, it's he said, she said. What evidence did I have to support me? So I didn't even think there was a point of telling anyone, because what's it going to do except piss him off, cut me off from my sisters, and then I couldn't protect them. Because even though I had moved out, I still went to church regularly, went to dinner at their house regularly, because I wanted to keep an eye on what was happening and what inappropriate behavior my father was now giving to my sisters now that I was gone and I was no longer his focus. And so it was a lot. And I know that I don't really have a lot of tips here for folks aside from saying, don't blame yourself for not coming forward. There are so many situations that lead people to not report their abuse, and I get it. I totally get it. But I will also say that a lot of the things that I thought had happened or was told were lies. And so learning later down the line that if I had tried to call CPS or tried to call the police, that they would have taken it seriously, was an eye-opener. As somebody who wanted to join law enforcement and had been in the Police Explorer program, and I'd had some of the basic, law enforcement cadet training, whatever, you would think that I would have had more trust in the career that I actually wanted to join. But I just didn't think that there was enough to come forward. And so I wish I had known at 13, when he first supposedly confessed, which was never really a confession, that it shouldn't have happened that way. And maybe I wouldn't have spent 5 years of my childhood being told, I'm not a threat, CPS and the police don't care about you. But again, I don't blame myself. It is what it is. I'm so fortunate that the things that happened, and that the police called me and they took me seriously. And the detective who worked my case, who was amazing, he said, we want to get him and we'll work with you to get him. And when I sat there and said, how? We have no evidence. He said, we'll figure it out. And it did. And he was convicted. But these are all the reasons I never came forward. I'm so lucky that somebody reported this on my behalf many years later. I got justice. And the story goes from there. But tell me your story. Is there, what happened to you that caused you to not report your abuse? Or, on the contrary, what finally inspired you to report your abuse? I would love to know who helped you, how were you supported, who motivated you, or how were you motivated to stand up for yourself, report your abuse, and get yourself some justice. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining my channel. Please hit the like and subscribe if you can. It really helps me out. And I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Thanks again. I'm Janae Cherie, and I'm here to tell my stories. Bye.